So we're reading through book 4 of the Aeneid, which is about the love affair between Aeneas and Dido and its collapse under the weight of Aeneas' destiny. And the whole time I'm reading this, I'm just thinking man, this couple really needs couples therapy. I am not kidding about this. So last time we talked all about female dysfunction. We talked all about the ways in which women, when things go awry, can tend to have these particular patterns of miscommunicating intentionally, of talking around the problem, of encouraging one another in bad ideas in order to be nice to each other out of a misplaced kind of empathy or touchy-feeling attitude. And I said the whole time, don't worry, I'm going to talk plenty about male dysfunction too. This is not just the hate on women show. This is the breakdown between the sexes show. And that's an incredibly major topic right now. It's something that people are thinking about, talking about all the time. And it's important that we talk about both at the same time, not just one after the other, but in conjunction. Because when you hear about the war between the sexes and you hear about, you don't even need at this point to cite any particular video or tweet or something. It's everywhere. You can just always hear people talking about how men and women don't understand each other. They don't like each other. The Barbie movie, right? Men hate women and women hate women. That's the one thing we can all agree on. I think was a famous line from that major blockbuster movie. This is like this really fraught and increasingly emotional, agitated topic in the world. And we talk a lot about, well, what's wrong with men? Are men too lonely? Are men too aggressive? Are men toxic? Are they being mistreated by society? And we talk a lot about what's wrong with women. Are they being mistreated by society? Is there a systematic dysfunction that oppresses them? Or are they being overly sensitive? And is the world too feminized? And we talk all about that. But we don't talk about the problems between men and women, the ways that men's and women's particular tendencies, habits, proclivities, likely forms of behavior can either harmonize with each other or they can get out of sync and they can jam together and they can increase one another's dysfunctions. And this may be news to you, but men and women kind of go together, right? This is like an ancient and eternal principle, the way of a man with a maid. You actually can't talk about the sexes purely in isolation from each other. Yes, it's true that we also have, male codes of virtue and honor and ways of doing things and acting together in female-only spaces and female ways of thinking about virtue and honor and all of that sort of thing. But still, even those, they would be called homosocial ways of thinking, not homosexual in the sense of gay or lesbian, but homosocial in the sense of we're hanging out together with only men or only women. Even those are defined in some ways with reference to the presence or absence of the opposite sex. And all of these dysfunctions, all of these problems are in some way codependent. They're interrelated and they interact with one another. It takes two to tango. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the continuing breakdown of relations between Aeneas and Dido. And I want to talk about Aeneas's problems here and the ways that he doesn't handle his destiny well. He has a different, as often in the case with men and women, he has a different challenge, a different set of trials and tragedies to face. It's not the same as Dido's. Dido has unrequited love. She's lost a love in her life. She's grieving her dead husband. She also has all this responsibility and she's alone in it, or she only has her sister to guide her with all these hostile male suitors around. Aeneas has his destiny. Aeneas has his task that he's been appointed by his role in society, his role in the world, and his role in history, in the plan of the gods. And that drags him away from many, many other things that he would much rather be doing. He would much rather just settle in a little hovel somewhere just outside of Troy. He would much rather settle down with Dido. He would much rather build Carthage with her and make his name kind of collaboratively with her. He can't do any of that. And he's already made a mistake by allowing himself to get waylaid and sidetracked. And he has also behaved badly here. And so the ultimate catastrophe, which we're going to talk about next time, is going to be created here. The groundwork is laid by this sort of dual dysfunction, this male and female dysfunction. And so I want to talk about kind of how that works and how Virgil portrays that extremely human, recognizable drama, maybe what we can learn from it for today's quote-unquote war between the sexes, and how that happens and takes place within the context of this epic theory of history, this kind of poetic drama of what Rome is and was and is destined to be. So I said at the outset that I really think these two need couples therapy. Obviously, couples therapy had not at the time been invented, but I am being kind of serious about this. Therapy is a bit of a running theme on this show. We've talked about it quite a bit because there has also been a lot of cultural commentary on whether our culture is over-therapized, whether therapy speak has crept into normal everyday language and given us this bizarre way of passing off bad behavior or simple vice as if it were self-care and boundaries and all of the things that we think we now can justify with this admittedly technical and kind of a weird way of speaking that we all have. And there have been people on the right who have said, therapy is useless, or therapy can never help, or, therapy is just about getting people drugs and all of that. And then there have been people who said, no, therapy's really helped me. And, I'm a bit in the middle. I think that it is clearly true that therapeutic modes of thinking have taken over. They've swallowed up every other way of thinking about social and psychological and spiritual health. And therapists, for a lot of people, have replaced priests and counselors and parents and friends, right? We go to therapy. Some of us go to therapy as a way actually of deflecting from the hard just business of being in the world and the weight of moral responsibility. You can become a perma-client. You can get trapped in navel-gazing. There's all sorts of pitfalls. Plus, it tends to skew kind of left, kind of secular. It tends to advocate, this is, again, broadly generalizing, but you tend to have a danger that if, for instance, you're a Christian and you have really strong beliefs about the afterlife and metaphysics, it can be possible to get in a relationship with a therapist who kind of wants to talk you out of that, or who doesn't think of that as valid. All of this, as I say, all of this is a preface, meaning I acknowledge that all of these things are problems. At the same time, my mom is a therapist. She's a very, very good therapist. And I have seen in my life and in my friends' lives and in my mom's work and all of that, I have seen the way that a true therapeutic relationship, which at its heart is really a relationship of love. It's a practice of love. And it's a practice of love that is within these kind of safe boundaries so that you can kind of test the waters before you go out into the messy world. This can transform people. The talking cure is genuinely a thing, and it's not all Freudian mishigas, and it's not all secular wild craziness, and some of it is actually resurrecting ancient principles of philosophy and psychology, which at base, in its Greek root, psychology is the study of the soul. And so sometimes it can be really cool to talk about modern practices of therapy and how they relate to ancient kind of eternal human truths and portrayals of relationships in the ancient world. So that's something I want to bring to bear today on this next series of interactions between Aeneas and Dido. And I want to talk specifically about one of the kinds of therapy that my mom practices, because she and I have a lot of really fun conversations about, well, Plato says this about the soul. What do various forms of schools of thought of modern therapy say about the soul and that sort of thing. And one thing that she has become licensed in is this thing called emotionally focused therapy. And I'm not in any way, I should say, a therapist. I'm not your therapist. And so don't take anything that I say here as kind of gospel truth about emotionally focused therapy or what you should do in your relationship. But I do think that, basically these concepts are pretty easy to grasp, and they're designed to be about again, eternal things, basic human nature stuff. This is not like how can we drug humanity into some new state of consciousness. This is like how do we cope with the birds and the bees, the way of a man with a maid, right? Emotionally focused therapy has this concept, and the kind of, I think, creator and certainly leader of EFT is called Sue Johnson, and she talks about the tango of relationships, the dance of relationships. And I was actually thinking about this too recently because Elon Musk tweeted that he thought his robot was going to dance perfectly. It's going to perform perfect ballet. And I thought that's actually such a revealing thing to say, because it's the same as all these people that want to replace like friendship or indeed the therapeutic relationship. They want to replace it with AI chatbots. So you don't have friends or you're anxious making friends. You can practice on ChatGPT. You can practice on Meta's AI assistant. What could possibly go wrong, right? Well, one thing that could go wrong with using AI in that way and for that purpose is that the idea of a perfect dance, perfect tango, is actually a really like technology-brained idea for thinking about this sort of thing. And if you think that ballet is just hitting the right positions at the right time, then you'll never understand this idea of relationships as tango, right? Because a tango and a relationship are both something that you can't just go through the motions of, literally. You can't just hit your mark. You are actually communicating and expressing something with the give and take of the dance, with the back and forth of the music. And so the emotionally focused therapy tango is basically a way of just thinking in simple terms about how to have a healthy relationship in these incredibly charged environments that we enter into. Because we all know basically how to treat each other, right? I mean, be kind, don't like tear your spouse down, lead with grace, follow with dignity, like all of these basic principles that we can all say. But in the moment, they're incredibly hard to do because we are these extremely angular, bent out of shape little creatures that are always letting our emotions get the better of us and, putting our wounds on other people and lashing out at people when really we feel shame on those things are just kind of, again, whatever account you want to give of it. Mine is the Christian account that this is original sin, but however you want to explain it, right? This is just the way of the world. I mean, you don't need a theology to teach you that this is true. This is just happening. And so this tango, or this idea of the dance, is like, here's a few steps that you kind of can do when you're having a fight with your partner. And when you're having this fight, then this will give you a way of kind of breaking out of the chaos cycle or the chaos like current that you're caught in, and you're just reacting to your emotions, and actually sort of take control of like, well, what are the dynamics at play here, and what's my responsibility, what's the other person's responsibility. And so again, just to sort of summarize, the whole thing is sort of laughable, it's sort of amusingly simple. It's, let's say there's something about your husband or wife that just completely drives you insane, and just for some reason, like, I don't know, your husband leaves a pile of clean laundry in this one chair in the bedroom, and it's like clean, but it's not folded, so it gets wrinkly, and this just like steams your strudel. It just like burns your muffins. You are so mad about this. The thing that couples will often do is they will snipe at each other about it. They will talk around it. They will talk about it until they have some blow up, right? And this is the kind of unhealthy way of dealing with this. EFT basically just says, okay, so you're mad about the laundry. Step one, process those feelings. What are you mad? Why are you really mad about the laundry? What drives you so insane about it? How can you communicate what you want and what you're feeling, and also maybe what it's bringing up for you, what it's causing you to kind of feel, and how can you lay those on your partner in a clear and healthy way that he or she can actually like act upon, can deal with and respond. Then your partner presumably feels some kind of way about the thing that you've said. Your partner processes his emotions or her emotions, and then the two of you kind of reassess, and you hopefully deepen your connection, knowing more about each other and like accepting these things about each other. Again, there's like a lot more to it than that, but when you really say the bare bones of what kind of good therapy looks like, it's kind of hilariously simple. It works with friends too, by the way. If you have friends that you are like falling out with, dealing with things this way, asking yourself, first of all, what am I actually feeling? What is it that is maybe making me feel that way? Is there anything besides the immediate object of my emotion that I need to kind of like untangle? And then like, how can I communicate that to the other person instead of sniping at them or making passive aggressive jokes or whatever, right? Wow, what a revolution in thought! Like such radical, very yes. This is it is kind of funny, but it's also hard, right? It's hard when you're swept up in emotions. It's hard when you can see kind of what you're supposed to do, should do, but you just don't want to and you don't feel like you can, which, by the way, is one way of recognizing. The Stoics would say here that this is one way of recognizing that your logos is in tow or in sway to your emotions, that your feelings are taking over your reason, and you need to find some way of stepping back and flipping the script on that. And so this is a great time that, when that happens, it's a great time to process and communicate your feelings. It's called emotionally focused therapy, I suppose, because it is about attending to your emotions rather than on the direct problem in front of you. And this is another thing that might make conservatives perhaps a little antsy. It certainly makes me antsy, and you can certainly overdo it. Like sometimes you just need to figure out a system for doing the dang laundry, right? Like that is definitely a possibility on the table. And another therapeutic approach might hear you say like, my husband leaves the laundry on the chair and drives me insane. And that therapist would say, well, how can we get him to stop doing that? How can we get you to, have what you need? And how can you guys collaborate on this? Whose job is what? And I think that conservatives tend to be very comfortable with that approach. I'm very comfortable with that approach because it's like, it's something you can accomplish, and it also doesn't run the risk of miring you in endless back and forth and relitigation of like your feelings about my feelings about your feelings about my feelings. But on the other hand, right, there is value sometimes, and this is what the emotionally focused part is, right? There's value sometimes in asking what it is about the laundry on the chair that is really just like, cracking you open. Why is that so intense for you? Because if it's something that is genuinely causing just like ugly fights, and it might not be underwear on the chair, it might be like taking the kids to their dance recital, it might be whatever, right? If that's happening, then once you fix the laundry on the chair problem, once you like figure out a system for who folds the laundry when and what the expectations are, it's just going to be something else, right? If there's an underlying emotional pattern, then it's not going to be the underwear on the chair anymore. It's going to be the butter cupboard, right? It's going to be the, like, who's in charge of the kid's science project. And then that's going to make you feel really angry until you figure out, like, why it is that your anger is, like, so raw near the surface in these particular places. So that's, like, emotionally focused therapy, right? That's turning in on the emotion, not because you're never going to deal with the actual immediate problem, but because you want the problems to stop cropping up in the first place. And so once you fix them, you want them to stay fixed. Anyway, that's emotionally focused therapy. And I feel some trepidation bringing it up in the context of Aeneas and Dido for a number of reasons. One of which is there is this very annoying modern habit of treating ancient heroes and epics and queens and kings and heroes of the past, treating them as if all they needed was this kind of infantilizing therapeutic approach, right? Like, Emily Wilson does this all the time. She's the kind of cause celeb translator of the Iliad and the Odyssey. She was the first woman to translate the Odyssey into English, and so she became really big. I don't think her translations are very good, and I really don't think that her kind of attitude about this, I find it like incredibly grating. She'll say things like, well, if like Achilles and Agamemnon had just talked it out, then like all those people wouldn't have had to die, right? And that is actually an overly soft, therapeutic, dare I say, feminized approach to these texts, that is not taking into account at all. That is not doing due justice to what they mostly have to communicate, which is not a kind of touchy-feely, everybody can work things out happy in the end sort of, America 2025 idea, but a profoundly Greek and Roman, now also tragic sensibility, that there are some things you absolutely cannot fix. That is the whole point of tragedy. It's the whole point of a poem like the Iliad, is to showcase the human predicament in such a way that you really see there are some things that simply must be lamented and mourned, right? And that actually there are certain duties and values and ideals that if we really want to believe in them, we are going to have to die, right? And we're going to have to, there's going to be chaos and the gods might not even be on our side, right? That is the world that we're living in when we live in Greek and Roman literature. And so what I don't want to say here is like, if Aeneas and Dido had just gone to therapy, everything would have worked out hunky-dory, and we would be living in like the world where everyone thinks about the Carthaginian Empire. Like, that is obviously the opposite of what Virgil is saying here, okay? Virgil is saying something much more profound and much more tragic, which is that history, duty, greatness calls upon us all to make terrible sacrifices, and those sacrifices don't go away just because they're worth it, right? It's worth it to found Rome, but it costs Aeneas everything. And this is the place where it costs him most, maybe. This might be the place where, at least one of the places where it costs him most, is when he has to leave Dido, and it happens in this catastrophic way. However, there's another side to Virgil, another important side that makes him a great artist, and I think an original artist, in a way maybe that hadn't yet been quite done before, which is that he takes that giant context of this disordered cosmos with a divine plan running through it, right? And the tragedy of like human messiness meeting up against immovable divine command. And within that setting, he places these very flawed, confused human beings who don't always know what they're supposed to be doing and who are completely recognizable as average workaday fellows. And this, I've been saying this from the beginning of this series. This is the cool thing about Virgil, that he gives you two openings where epic typically begins with this strong statement of what the poem is about, right? It's Andra moi anapemusa, sing me a man, right? This complicated, as Emily Wilson calls him, but twisty-turny, many ways turning man, an aner polytropos, or sing me the Manus, the rage of Achilles. Virgil gives us arma virumque cano, right? I sing of arms and a man. He gives us Juno with her plots, and he gives us Zeus with his, kind of somewhat beleaguered, long-suffering, but indulgent kind of relationship with his with Aphrodite, who is Aeneas' mother. And he gives us Aeneas, the panicked, despairing, almost suicidal exile from his home, who's just seen everything he loves destroyed. And that Aeneas is not the man of pristine and perfect obligation and responsibility, right? He is not a Mary Sue. He's not a perfect hero. He's somebody that really does not know or kind of even resists his destiny, doesn't understand it, seems a little bit even obtuse, maybe willfully obtuse about it sometimes. And so within that giant scale, we know that Aeneas and Dido have to be broken up. We know that this can't endure because we know how the story ends. But we also know that both of them can act more or less nobly, more or less virtuously within that context. They can behave, they can cope with their fate in ways that we admire and in ways that we don't admire. And that's what the genius of it is, that we can still say, like, this could have turned out perhaps less catastrophically if Dido had been a little bit more level-headed, or if she had been able somehow to like take control of this fever that gripped her. And we can debate and talk forever about whether she had the power to do that when she was infected by love. And similarly, we can say of Aeneas, right? He has to go, right? He has ended up in this position where he must now break this woman's heart, and she is so, like, completely smitten. She's so deranged at this point in her intense infatuation that it's going to enrage her. But we can still ask questions about Aeneas, like, should he have gotten into this scenario in the first place? Was there a way in which he was too passive in allowing Dido basically to just sweep him up in her love affair? Is there a way in which he was, like, sort of sexually into her, but not all that really just devoted to her in the way that she was? Did he lead her on? Now that he's in this mess, right, are there better and worse ways of getting out of it? And that is his sort of challenge. And I would argue that both Aeneas and Dido fall short of this challenge in ways that are actually kind of revealed by what I just said about emotionally focused therapy. It's about the way that they communicate to one another. It's about how they talk on this very human level to each other that makes this not just sad, not just tragic, but utterly catastrophic. So let's jump back into the text itself. Let's read some of the poem. Where we left off was that, there's this weird kind of alliance in heaven, in Olympus, between Venus, the goddess of love, and Juno, the queen of the goddesses. And they have this, like, frenemyship, basically. They just have this very catty interaction that has a long history in epic, where they pretend to be an alliance, but really Venus is going to get her way. But that means that both Juno and Venus are now conspiring to, like, smash Dido and Aeneas together. And they go on this hunting trip that ends in an extremely warped, fake marriage. I say fake, it's really not clear exactly how legitimate it is. And one of the themes that Virgil is playing with here is the distinction between kind of natural human passions and civically, culturally recognized human institutions. So how legitimate is it when Aeneas and Dido go away as they're about to do, and it's strongly implied consummate this union, right? They sleep together, and also the gods, the rogue renegade gods, Juno especially, preside over it in what is sort of a pagan nature rite. Like, it feels as if there's some sense of, this is like the kind of union that needs to be tamed by civilization. And what it lacks is the institutions, the rituals of, say, Roman marriage. It's kind of like when we talk about now, we say, well, do you really need a piece of paper, or can you just live together forever and commit to one another, right? Do you really need to say the words and stand at the altar and all of that? And I always find that kind of a funny argument, because my reaction to that is like, isn't most of human life just saying words to each other? I mean, this stuff matters, right? And isn't most, like, legal contract, most obligation just kind of pieces of paper? Like, that's what we have. These are our means of doing this. And all of that is lacking from this, right? Besides which, Virgil gives us a few textual clues that this is, like, bad mojo. This really is not. More than a few. The first one, and as always, I'm translating my own translation here from the Latin so that we can really, like, get our hands dirty with the text. The first one is in the first verb of this passage that I'm going to read to you, de veniunt. They go off the path, right there. So they're hunting, and it's a really, Virgil is really good at this. He takes these, like, verbs, these words that he would use anyway to describe the literal situation, but then they are all charged and pregnant with other metaphorical meanings. They're on this hunt. They split off from the group. So this happens alone without witnesses. That's another thing that makes it kind of sus, right? And they de veniunt. They go off the path, but they also obviously deviate, right? This is all, many languages, including English, have this idea that, like, sin and error has to do with going off the path, twisting the straight way, right? Like, it's perversion, it's deviation, whatever. So they go off the path. They de veniunt into a cave. Speluncam Dido dux et Trojanus eandem de veniunt. Right there, Dido dux, right? Dido the leader. This is Aeneas commenting on girl bossery, or rather, I should say it's Virgil commenting on girl bossery, because at this point we've just got the kind of nameless narrator, right? So previously, already, we've had that word attached to Dido, and it was when she was fleeing in desperation from persecution in her hometown, and she was making her way to Carthage. And Virgil has this famous phrase, dux femina facti, a woman is a leader of the deed. Now, to be totally blunt, like for a Roman, that's deeply, deeply suspect from the get-go. It's connected to like Cleopatra, whom they've just conquered in Virgil's day. It's connected in general to this like older Greek idea that when women take the lead or they enter into male roles, there's something fearsome and terrifying about it, but also probably deranged, right? Dido has had all of those elements attached to her, but she's also had what is also part of the Roman tradition. She's had a kind of nobility, right? There are also women in the classical tradition, and I'm thinking here of like Penthesilea. I'm thinking of the Amazons, right? I'm thinking about Artemisia, the Persian kind of naval, the queen who fought on the Persian side, right? There are women that genuinely attain status in the male world and have like admirable qualities that make them good leaders. And Dido had that, but now it has all curdled and gone awry. And now it is the ugliest version of female leadership that doesn't just ennoble the woman, but actually degrades the man. Because you'll notice, cleverly, Aeneas is not even named here, right? Dido is the leader, and Trojan, Aeneas is just the Trojan, and they go aside into the same cave. Very densely constructed Latin to convey here that they're making a mistake. They're making a mistake not just because the woman is #leaning in. That's only part of it, right? Like I said, it always takes two to tango. They're also making a mistake because the man is leaning out, right? Aeneas is not taking charge of his destiny here. He's being led. And it's not so much that Romans have a categorical problem with women leading in every case, especially in mythological contexts, is that they have a categorical problem with men not leading, right? With men stepping down from their duty or abdicating from their responsibility. So at least this is not an equal partnership. And at worst, right, this is a kind of overbearing, or like, this is Dido's passion taking control. And it's her kind of trying to force something that I think everybody involved can see has some major problems with it, right? At this point, there are obvious reasons why not to do this. And if there weren't before, there are going to be in just a second. So let me read to you my translation of this very famous passage. They go astray, the leader, Dido, and the Trojan in a cave. At first, the earth herself, then Juno, presiding as the bride's attendant, gives the signal, then the flames and the conspiring atmosphere flash brightly at the nuptials, and nymphs are keening from the highest peaks. They ulularant, by the way, which is an amazing, they ululate, right? This is a phrase that came up when we had the war in Afghanistan, the idea of ululation or ritual keening, right? The nymphs are keening from the highest peak. That day became the cause of all the evils and the griefs that followed it. No thought of reputation or appearances can move her now, and Dido doesn't think of it as secret love. She calls it marriage. In this title is the pretext that she hopes can hide her shame. So, obviously, big mistake, right? At this point, the narrator, Virgil, is making no bones about it. The cause of all the evils and the griefs that followed. Dido has thrown caution to the winds. She's completely lost the plot. And she's lost it in this way that is very recognizable, where she wants this thing so badly that she can't see, or she's convincing herself not to see, that it is obviously perverse. Like it's obviously curdled in some way. And this whole thing is like a kind of Rocky Horror Picture Show version of a Roman marriage, right? It's a weird, like, cabaret sort of parody of what typically happens in a marriage, that we have Juno is serving, it's called the pronuba, and you almost want to call her the maid of honor, except she's not a maid. She's not the typical idea of a maid of honor. It's more like the bride's attendant, kind of the matronly person who gets her ready. And then you have the nymphs, who are obviously serving in the kind of choral role of the bridesmaids that was very recognizable from the ancient ceremony. Torches are a big part of it, but here it's like the ether itself, the atmosphere, the air, like lights a flame, and the nymphs are keening. They're not singing exactly. They're like, wailing, basically. So this is obviously like dark marriage, right? This is like a sort of shadow version of the ritual. And Dido is ignoring it, right? She's just saying, yep, that's marriage. Like, that's obviously normal. And we just are going to, like, press right on ahead. And isn't it great? And I talked to the florist and I ordered, right? Have you heard this person before? Like, you should recognize this, right? This is like a person who's rushing into something that we know is wrong. And maybe we don't have the heart to tell them. But they're like, yeah, we're like moving in together. It's been a month. But like, I love him so much. And like, I'm getting, Dido is on that train. And so, to return to the idea of EFT, EFT is related to attachment theory, which has a slightly longer history. It predates Sue Johnson and EFT, but it's very closely related and uses a lot of attachment theory. And this is basically the idea that we all need attachment, secure attachment, it's called. And our first kind of model relationship for that is usually our parents. And so it's got a lot to do with, did you learn what it looks like to know unconditional love and to operate honestly and openly within a context of unconditional love so that you are then confident expressing your needs, but also hearing other people, like, dealing with other people's emotions. Like, how secure are you in yourself and in your ability to attach and to do the tango? It's almost like the attachment itself is the music of the tango, right? Like, how solid is the beat? And when this gets out of whack, which it basically always does at some point somehow, because again, the world is a mess, right? When this gets out of whack, people tend to like tilt too far in one or the other direction, and they tend to attach to people who are tilted too far in like the complementary direction. And this is dysfunction and codependency, right? This is when, let's say that I had a parent who like really withheld love, like never, that, for instance, let's say my dad is always claiming not to be related to me. I'm just kidding. My dad and I are great, by the way. But like, let's say that like there's like a withholding parent. I might learn to like really, really try to just elicit expressions of affection from somebody that is very stingy with them. And then I might become what's called like an anxious or preoccupied attachment style type person. And that's like the person who's pursuing. And so now instead of a tango where you're moving back and forth across the dance floor and you're listening to each other's signals, now you're in this one-way chase, right? You're hunting. And there's lots of depictions of this in Greek mythology. I mean, I'm thinking of like Apollo and Daphne. Daphne obviously doesn't want Apollo. Apollo won't take no for an answer, and she ends up having to turn into a tree, right? It's like this, I mean, obviously there's more going on in that story, but one thing that's going on is this idea of like pursuant attachment style, of anxious, preoccupied. And this is the form of attachment dysfunction that women are most predisposed to. There's plenty of relationships in which it goes the other way, but generally, right, I think it's often like the woman who is trying to get more out of the man, and when the man isn't giving it, and when the woman isn't secure in like, knowing that she deserves it or whatever, not deserves it, but knowing that she can ask for it, I guess, then she becomes anxious and preoccupied. And it's exactly this sort of behavior. It's like, let's like pretend that this relationship is where it is, while meanwhile you are the one like generating all the affection, generating all the excitement and desire, and calling it marriage when it's obviously something is wrong, right? Meanwhile, Aeneas is doing the typical guy thing, which is that he is withdrawing. This is called avoidant, and there's sort of various different versions of this, like avoidant attachment style. He's withdrawing, and he's kind of withdrawing into himself, right? He's not stoic and secure. He is actually very passive, right? And his passivity is because he doesn't want to deal with Dido. And she's a lot right now. Let's be totally clear, right? Dido is a lot. But Aeneas is just kind of going along with it. He doesn't want to deal with her. He also doesn't want to deal with the giant kind of elephant in the room, which is his destiny, and the fact that none of this should be happening at all. And so he just becomes Troyanus. He just becomes the Trojan, right? He's like kind of, shambling along, shoulders drooped. We can picture him just kind of like, yes, dear, following around. He's not giving her what she wants, right? He's not giving her the studly hero that she kind of made him out to be in her deep infatuation. Remember, she made that speech. He's so handsome, his big chest, he's suffered so much. Like, again, these are things that people say when they have like projected an entire a hero onto somebody who's not yet ready to be a hero. And this is like a very, very recognizable thing. And in some ways, you don't even need like emotionally focused therapy. You don't even need the attachment style stuff to like theorize this. It can be helpful, right? But we've all seen this. We've all seen the guy who, for whatever reason, and again, maybe it's got to do with their childhood, maybe not, whatever, like, this is where I will be hard on and say it doesn't really matter, like, quote unquote, where it came from. You do have to, like, move past this stuff. You got to, quote unquote, do the work. And instead, Aeneas is avoiding. And that is the scenario that I think Virgil is very clearly depicting. And it's just, to me, endlessly, heartbreakingly beautiful that he's depicting this thing that we can recognize after 2,000 years. We can see it like it's today, right? We can see that with perfect, pristine clarity, people we know, maybe things that we've done, right? Ways that we've been, that we know are broken. And we see it now within the context of this like enormous world-breaking transformational story. And there's enormous pathos and there's enormous pity in it, but there's also enormous humanity. And I think that this is one thing that can be like salvific about great literature, is that you see yourself in this, right? Like Aeneas is a great hero, but he's also like you, right? And so you also have a hero's quest to go on, and it does involve these pedestrian things. It involves these sort of squishy, squirmy, uncomfortable conversations about emotions, facing up to your feelings, right? Why am I so annoyed about the underwear chair? Like, why does it get me so? Like, is it because maybe, I feel that my partner fundamentally doesn't like value or care about my comfort, right? Why does it drive me so insane? I saw a woman on TikTok the other day who said her husband said something really nasty to her. She was like super excited about a movie, and she was going on and on and on about it in this way that I'm sure was like kind of cute, kind of annoying, whatever. And he said, like, it's just a movie. Like, it's kind of annoying when you get so excited. And this obviously just like broke her heart. And she was talking about it, and she was like, there's some part of this is like, if you don't have anything that you feel that way about, maybe it's going to be extra annoying when somebody is that excited and over the top, right? To be clear, it's annoying when people are excited and over the top. And people like me who get excited and over the top about, like, for example, ancient literature, we have to sometimes moderate our enthusiasms in contexts where they're not appropriate. Like, sometimes people aren't just in the mood. I have discovered through trial and error and experimentation, I have discovered sometimes people just aren't in the mood for a, 30-minute lecture on Hellenistic poetics, right? That's just, like, something you have to keep under wraps sometimes. But also, you have a right to it, right? Like, this is part of my joy in life, is this. And so when somebody is just, like, fundamentally set against it, and if that's you, like, if you're thinking, like, yeah, I just hate when this person just goes off about this, it's like, why? Is it because, perhaps, like, you are feeling like you don't have anything that sparks you up like that lights you up that way, right? And so you resent this not just because they're managing it badly, which they may also be, but because like you feel that they don't value you that much, right? Or they don't care as much about you as they do about, for the woman, it was like this movie that they'd gone to see, right? She cares more about this movie than about me, right? Like, what are you thinking and feeling? That sort of squishy stuff, right, is also the stuff of heroes, because it's ultimately in like these pedestrian concerns that we work our way toward accepting and living within the destiny and the difficulties of life. And I just think that's like a beautiful thing about this poem that is almost making me cry a little bit. One thing that they never do in this whole sequence, right, that whole passage I just read to you, what's one thing they never do? Talk to each other. This is why I say they really need couples therapy, or whatever the ancient equivalent would have been, right? Because Virgil is great about this. He's really good at showing you. It's like, yeah, she's going crazy. He's like falling short, right? He's shirking his destiny, but they're also just like not talking to they're literally not saying any words to each other. And I suspect that part of the tragedy of this is that if they could figure out a way to communicate, right, to like come to some sort of acknowledgement of the tragic and acceptance of the tragic situation that they find themselves in, right? If they could do that, this might not end in exactly the disaster that it ends in. Still be sad, still be very, very heartbreaking. In fact, that's part of the lesson of the poem, is that life has heartbreak in it, but it might not be quite so awful, so tragic. So what happens next is that Iarbas, who is the king, another king in North Africa. Famous figure, or relatively well-known figure from mythology. Iarbas finds out. Rumor goes running abroad, and there's this amazing depiction running throughout the Aeneid. There's this amazing depiction of Rumor with her many eyes and many wings and tongues, and she goes flittering about, and she tells everybody about this thing. And also Dido's not helping because she's like, just she's like sending out wedding announcements, right? Iarbas finds out. They've forgotten that they are in an extremely dangerous geopolitical context, and that they are like surrounded by enemies. They're not safe. Iarbas is the son of Hammon, the god of Carthage, which I'll get to in a second. But he's also a disappointed suitor, one of Dido's many disappointed suitors. And so he hears about this, and he's like, what the hell? What gives, right? I offered her everything, offered her safety and protection, and now this like Trojan guy, this like little nothing comes in and takes this girl that like I was owed. And so there's something really kind of off about Iarbas' reasoning here, and there's something very distasteful about him. But he is also the son of Hammon. Now, interesting side note about Hammon, okay? Hammon is the Carthaginian god, and this is true, historically true. He was basically Baal. So if you've read the Bible, or if you are a Christian or a Jew, you know that the Bible is obsessed with the Baals. Put away the Baals of the other nations, right? B-A-A-L, Baal or Baal, right? Put away the Baals of the other nations. And sometimes we don't realize what that means, what the context of it is, or what that's describing. Baal is basically just a title. It means Lord. It's a little bit like Adonai, which is the word that we give to God, to Jehovah, right? Baal is another word in the Semitic languages for like Lord God. So whichever god in your community happens to be the chief god, he would be Baal. And so Hammon is Baal Hammon, Lord Hammon. And you could even say, I mean, if the Greeks had spoken a Semitic language, Zeus might have been Baal Zeus. And so when the Bible says put away the Baals and the Ashtaroths and all of that, it's saying all of these, right? All the fertility goddesses, all the king gods, like put them all away. And the reason it's saying that is because a lot of these cults, like a lot of these gods, were nasty pieces of work, including the Carthaginian Baal. Baal Hammon almost certainly demanded child sacrifice. This was something that was kind of contested in modern scholarship because it was uncomfortable to sort of make these sorts of people thought it wasn't PC, it wasn't nice to the Carthaginians. But, when we say Carthago delenda est, right, they almost certainly were, in fact, slaughtering and sacrificing babies to this god. And so Baal Hammon is bad news, and he's the kind of deity, and he represents the kind of society that the Bible is very keen to totally and outright reject and disavow. The Jews are supposed to be completely different from this, and anytime they fall into these sorts of patterns and practices, God is very unhappy. You have made God very unhappy when you do this. This is not something that appears anywhere in the Aeneid. And the reason why is very, very interesting. The Greeks and Romans were themselves pagans. They had their own Baal, in a certain sense, in Zeus. Not to say that they were sacrificing children to him left and right, although there is some of that in the myths, and there's some suggestion that may have happened from time to time. But, it's not like they were just as bad as the Carthaginians or anything. It's just like they had basically the same structure. And so they don't have the same Jewish and Christian idea that fundamentally this is a theological problem. The problems with Carthage are political, they're historical, they're military, they're all those things. And, Carthago delenda est, the Romans are quite clear on like not wanting Carthage and hating Carthage and vilifying Carthage, but not on these terms. They're not making a theological critique. In fact, Greeks and Romans tend to feel that gods are basically the same everywhere. And it's just the same pantheon with different names, by different names. And you get very explicit sort of philosophical arguments about this. This is why all the Greek gods also have Roman names, is because once the Romans like encountered the Greek pantheon, they were like, oh yeah, that's our, your Zeus, that's our Jove, right? Your Aphrodite, that's our Venus. And they were very good at this. And it was part of how they like incorporated a bunch of other different civilizations, is they were just happy to put your god in their pantheon or identify him with one of their own. And so sometimes Baal Hammon is called like Zeus Hammon. He's like the same as Zeus. He's just the king god. And this is why the epics tend to represent the other cultures as worshiping the same god. I mean, this starts with the Iliad. The Trojans in the Iliad worship Athena. They worship the same gods as the Greeks. It's not a theological war. And the same is true here. So Iarbas, this disappointed suitor of Dido, is a worshiper of Zeus, and he has an in with Zeus. So he calls out and he says, like, what the heck is going on here? Avenge me, right? If I'm really your favorite, like, avenge me. And this, at long last, gets Zeus's attention. And there's a really interesting rhyme here with everything I was just talking about with Aeneas, is that Zeus has kind of been an absentee father, right? And so even at the level of like the attachment theory where it's your dad maybe that taught you to withdraw, or it's your mom that taught you to like, seek out attachment or whatever. Zeus is not Aeneas' father, but he has this like model of sort of the withdrawal, the like weak or absent father in Zeus, who finally now decides he's going to like pay attention and get down to brass tacks. Because Venus, a little like Dido, has been taking the lead, right? She's been the one trying to push Aeneas' destiny forward. She's been nagging Zeus about it on the model of like Thetis in the Iliad. But Zeus has been like, yeah, it's going to happen, fine, whatever. And some of that is because he's the king of the gods and he genuinely, like, all these goddesses that are freaking out, it's like, all right, I'll pay attention when this is really important. But now it's like pretty important. And he looks down, everything is clearly getting derailed. This is not the plan. It's definitely not the time for Aeneas to be like cavorting with Dido. He's got work to do. And so Zeus does what he always does in epic when this sort of situation arises, which is that he sends Hermes. He dispatches his courier service overnight, sparing no cost of postage, right? Like express postage. Hermes is the god of messages, and he sends him down. And this is very Odyssey, such Calypso, much wow. This is like totally taken from the episode in the Odyssey when Odysseus is being held hostage by Calypso, or at least he's being kind of like fondled and caressed and cherished by Calypso when he needs to get home. And with Odysseus, it was very much clearer that Odysseus had a point, right? And this is a contrast that we keep getting between Odysseus and Aeneas, that Aeneas doesn't know where he's headed. Odysseus very clearly does. That's almost the whole point of his story, is he's got a nostos to do. He's got home to return to. And so he's weeping and he's begging Calypso, please, please, beautiful, immortal, sexy lady, like, let me go home to my faithful, loving wife. Aeneas is not at that level at all. We've talked about all the ways that he's kind of being led around by the nose right now, but he's still going to get the kick in the pants that you get in these situations, which is a message from Hermes. And Hermes, one of my favorite characters in this poem, Hermes is a dog. This is also well attested in the epics that Hermes is the god who like does locker room talk, and he and Apollo are always kind of like ribbing each other. And there's a scene in the Odyssey, famous scene in the Odyssey, where Aphrodite, that is Venus, and Mars, the god of war, are sleeping together, and Aphrodite's married to Hephaestus, and Hephaestus traps them in this net, and like Apollo and Hermes are like, hey bro, like, would you get trapped in a net, like, just to sleep with Venus? Like, and they're like, yeah, totally, I'd do with everyone watching. Like, there's this really like gross kind of like locker room talk, bro speak thing that goes on with Hermes. And Virgil gives him this truly like all-timer of an opening for his speech, which is going to become very serious, but which begins with all these puns based on the totally ubiquitous idea that like cities are women, right? Women in cities are female, and women are sort of analogized to cities. And so he basically says to Aeneas, hey, you out here founding a city, huh? Like you're laying some foundations, and there's all sorts of puns where Carthage is alta, she's tall. You're making this pulchrum urbem. You're making this beautiful city. You are uxorious. You're a wife guy. To be uxorious is still a word in English meaning that you are being totally like henpecked and doormatted by your wife, right? Everything that I've just been describing that Virgil has shown us, he's now having to have Hermes tell us, and he tells it in a pretty low and vulgar way. So here's my translation. He launched right in. So now it's tall and lovely Carthage whose foundations you're arranging in their place. You're all wifed up and raising high your pretty city. For shame! And all the business of your realm forgotten. So now it turns very quickly serious, right? And one of Virgil's great enjambments, that is the moment where the meaning of the line carries on into the next line, is that transition I just read. It's Carthaginus alta fundamenta locas, the deep foundations of Carthage, which again is like pretty explicit that the foundations are tall, but they're also deep, and so you're plowing deep into the earth to make this beautiful city, right? Nunc Carthaginus alta fundamenta locas, pulcrumque uxorius urbem. So we're still in this kind of like jocular ribbing mode, this beautiful city, you wife guy, right? And then the next line, extruus, right? You are raising high, you're piling up, and suddenly we're in the language of epic again. And like, this is very powerful effect to change the mood on Aeneas so quickly. It's like, maybe we're kidding around, maybe we're pals a little bit. No, like, get your act together, dude. Like, figure this out. Okay, for shame, hell. This is a famously kind of untranslatable word, but it's like, for shame, and all the business of your realm forgotten. He sent me from his realm himself, from bright Olympus. So there's that rhyme between Aeneas and Zeus. Zeus is the king on Olympus. He has a regnum, and he regnat, and he is regnator. And you, Aeneas, are supposed to be a regnator too, right? You have your realm, which is like heaven on earth, right? It's like Olympus down in the world. He sent me from his realm himself, from bright Olympus. He who bends the earth and heaven to his will commands. I bring his orders on the rushing winds. What is this that you're building? Quid struus? What are you doing, bro? Or you hope to gain? What is this that you're building, or you hope to gain from whiling leisure time away in Libya? If nothing stirs your heart to glory in such deeds, if praise is not enough to spur your efforts, what about Ascanius? Think about your posterity, man. Like, this is like completely shameful that you are not just throwing away your inheritance, your destiny, but also your kids, also your sons. What about Ascanius, the rising heir? Consider Iulus and his realm, the Roman land. You owe that much to him. Cui regnum Italiae Romanaque tellus debentor. The Roman land and the region, the realm of Italy, are owed to him, to Ascanius. This is a thorough drubbing, a thorough dressing down, and also it comes as a message from the gods. So if you don't do it, you're probably going to get lightning bolted. This is Imperium. This is the full voice of command. This is what it looks like for the man to take charge in this poem, right? Maybe Zeus has been a little bit distracted. Maybe he has been a little bit frivolous. Maybe he's been doing his classic kind of sleeping around. But now things are deadly serious, and Aeneas has got to go. Naturally, this scares the living daylights out of him. And not just because he has to get back on the path that he does not want to walk. He has to do the thing that he knows he has to do but doesn't want to. But also because now he's got to talk to Dido. And we all know, everybody knows the feeling. I mean, this is like, in sitcoms, this is usually the guy, and there is a lot, Aeneas reacts in a very dude kind of way to this, but it's universal. Everyone knows the experience of dreading a conversation with your spouse, your partner, right? Holy crap, I know this is going to set them off. This is going to drive them insane. This is going to be such a difficult conversation, right? There's a guy on Instagram that I follow who talks about this sort of thing. He's like, it's like you swiping an emotional credit card, right? If there's a difficult conversation that you don't want to have, that you dread having, you swipe that credit card and you just pass the debt off down the line. And you pass it and you pass it and you pass it, and then finally it comes due. The right thing to do, always in that scenario, is have the conversation. Think about how to have it, approach it kindly, gently, honestly, but then have it, right, as soon as possible. Aeneas, to say the least, does not do this. I think that this is probably his worst moment. One of his worst moments, certainly. He tries to sneak away. And he does it in this way that's really weaselly because he sort of pretends that he's trying to find a time to talk to Dido. But basically, he makes all the preparations in secret so that she will be taken by surprise, or she, like, ideally wouldn't know at all. Ideally, we'd be gone. Like, breakup. This is breakup note territory. This is breakup by text. This is like, I left you a note on your bedside table, right? And Virgil gives us a very vivid, very real description of what that looks like. And this is withdrawal, right? This is the avoidant emotional attachment style. This is avoiding your responsibility and also the hard conversations that you have to have when something, I mean, this has to happen, right? He's right about that. This is a certainty. It has to happen. It doesn't have to happen like this. So Virgil gives us, Aeneas stood completely dumbstruck. Stupefied, yeah, I'll bet he did. And there's really emphatic words here. At vero Aeneas aspectu obmutuit amens. He was mindless, right? He was literally like out of his wits with worry about this. His hair on end with horror, voice caught in his throat. He's burning now to flee the sweetness of these shores. And we all know that feeling too, right? This is the one night stand gone awry. This is the love affair that you now want out of. It's just like, this used to be sweet, and now I really want to get out of here ASAP, preferably like via an Irish goodbye, preferably without having to talk about it, right? In awe of such a warning from imperious gods. Ha! What to do? Another heu, quid agat, right? Ha! What to do? Address the queen and meet her rage with words? How could he dare? And where would he begin? It splits his darting mind, and now it's here, now there. He falls to pieces, grasps at shreds, and hits upon a plan more feasible than the alternatives. I love this line. Oh man. Haec alternanti potior sententia visa est. Visa est. It seemed to him, right? This is not an endorsement from Virgil. This is not like, yes, this was better. It was that he was thinking about different possibilities. To him, vacillating, alternanti, potior sententia, a better opinion. Potior, more possible, more feasible, a plan more feasible than the alternatives. And here's his big idea. Here's his big plan, all right? He calls on Mnestheus, Sergestus, strong Serestus. Okay, so he gets his bros around him. Kind of a good idea, actually, to consult with friends when you're having this sort of problem. He calls on them to equip the fleet in silence for departure. Summon all their fellow sailors down to shore, prepare the arms of warfare, and conceal the cause that makes them pick their secret business up again. Do it all in secret, right? Under wraps. Taciti, in silence. They arm apparent, that they should arm apparent, right? Arma is a big word in this poem. The arms of war, right? He's getting ready to move on into the second half of the poem, into the new phase of his journey. He's got one more big hurdle ahead first, which is the journey into the underworld, but we've got in mind the warfare that is ahead, the second half of the poem, because this is going to be a major hinge point once we get through this episode, right? We are kind of on this new trajectory toward the destination, but right now he's doing it all in this, I think, very shameful way. Meanwhile, he deliberates within himself. Since queenly Dido doesn't realize or suspect the rupture of so great a love affair, what time might be the gentlest one to speak? What method best for things like this? And all of them are sharp and eager, happy to prepare and do what he commands. So his buddies are ready to get the hell out of Dodge. They've been wondering probably for quite some time what's happened to the big guy, right? What is going on with the boss? And now they're like, thank God, like finally, we've been waiting for this, waiting to depart. Aeneas is doing this thing that a lot of people do, where he's like, I'm just going to find the right time. I'm just waiting for the right time. I'm waiting for the right time to tell her, right? He's trying to act honorably. There's no question about that. I mean, he is the hero. He's definitely trying to do the right thing. But he is just the picture, man, of the insecure attachment style. And this is how it works, right? And it usually has these particular dynamics. Like the woman wants the affection, wants the expression of love, wants the kind of affirmation, and she's not getting it. So she pursues harder and harder. She like calls this weird like cave sex marriage, right? She does everything she can to just like force the issue through, force affection out of her. He won't admit he's scared to talk to her. He's like something it's hard to say. So he just withdraws, right? And the man withdraws, and he can't bring himself to crush her dreams. And that makes her pursue even more, right? That makes her more frantic, which makes him more withdrawn, which makes her more frantic. And it's this incredibly vicious cycle. This is the sort of cycle that EFT, which we began with, is like sort of there to break. And this is starting to sound like an advertisement for EFT. It's really not. I just find it a very interesting way to like think about all of this. And I think that, it is a testament to Virgil as a student of character, right? It's a testament to his insight into human nature that he's capable of displaying like ululating nymphs and the sky on fire and like the queen of gods and the king of gods, like issuing commands, and at the same time, totally integrating that with an extremely plausible, extremely human, extremely sad account of two people missing each other, of two people not only being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but coping in the best way they know how that is really not very well, right? They are totally overmatched, totally overawed, and it is not going to end well, and that is what we are going to get to next time, the tragic conclusions. In the meantime, talk to your partners, people. Effective communication. Don't end up like Dido and Aeneas. Next time you will see why you really don't want to end up like them. And we will then be done with book 4, which is a big deal. We're kind of making our way into the center of the poem, the core of the poem. And that's coming up next. So don't forget, by the way, if you haven't already, to subscribe. Wherever you're listening, however you get podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. There's video on YouTube if you're interested in that sort of thing. Please do subscribe. Please do rate the show 5 stars. Drop a comment. All of that just makes my heart sing. I'm really happy to hear from you. And it helps. It helps for the show to be listened to. And I have so much fun doing this show. And I love to hear from you that you are enjoying it. I would love for more people always to be enjoying it, because I think this literature is like some of our greatest treasure. I think that it can genuinely improve your life, and I think it can be a joy. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. So please do subscribe, therefore, to let people know. Okay. A few other things. I like to do a segment at the end called It Figures, but I also have a mailbag question that is about it figures. So instead of talking specifically about figures of speech, I'm going to answer this wonderful question from Samantha. Mailbag questions come to me via Substack, and that's another place that you can read my work and get in touch with me. It's rejoiceevermore.substack.com. Send me a DM, subscribe, become a paid subscriber if you'd like to support me. That would be great. Samantha has a very, very nice note. She says, "Hi, Spencer. Thank you so much for Young Heretics and the Roundtable. I'm a huge fan of both." That's wonderful. I'm so glad to know. And you then say in the next sentence, "We are classical homeschoolers," and I'm always particularly honored, touched, moved, grateful when I know that my listeners are educators or homeschoolers. You guys are like you are so important right now. Education is in such a criminal shambles in this country, and I can help, and I want to help, and I'm doing everything I can to help, but like you guys who are raising your kids and educating them and getting them an education, like you are the heroes. I'm just here to help. I'm very glad to be a part of that. We added, says Samantha, we added rhetorical terms into our memory work. My boys are 7, 9, and 11, so I know it's early, but I think it's interesting. We had fun with it. So that's awesome. So I've been going through what I think are wonderful, useful words, which are things like, synecdoche and anaphora and prosopopoeia and peripeteia and all sorts of things that, describe literature and describe the use of language so that you can be more effective at it. And Samantha is... homeschoolers are often like this, that they get these very sophisticated concepts very early on. Our main source of info for this has been the book Elements of Eloquence by Forsyth. Yeah, I know that book. Actually, speaking of my mom, the therapist, my mom read it and passed it on to me. It's not a textbook, but I find it funny and entertaining. It's a good source. I have started your Aeneid series with the rhetorical term moment, which is this segment I do called It Figures. Your definition and those of Forsyth differ often. I'm curious if you could recommend a source text that doesn't require a PhD in lit, but is perhaps more academic than we are using now. Yes, it would be my delight. And let me just set the stage, lay the table here a little bit by saying, these terms that I'm giving you, they are generally recognizable around the world from scholar to scholar. But they have sometimes their definitions can be different in different contexts. Let me say what I mean by this. When I'm talking about the Aeneid, I'm talking about these poetic terms. I'm talking about poetry, right? And that has rhetorical elements in it, but it is a literary genre, right? Poetry is a literary genre, and it has its own rules and systems. And even though you use many of the same rhetorical turns of phrase in poetry, you might use them slightly differently in oratory, which is to say when you're giving a speech, and you might use them differently in written prose, right? And so textbooks or books or reference works that deal with these kinds of figures of speech are can often like give slightly different definitions depending on what they're working with. And so I want to recommend to you 3 different books, all by one author, and they are very readable. In fact, they're meant to be general reference works, which approach these terms from the 3 classic angles, from the 3 directions that we typically approach them from. And they are called, Farnsworth is the name of the author. And so they are Farnsworth's Classical English Rhetoric, Farnsworth's Classical English Style, and Farnsworth's Classical English Argument. And if you're really a discerning reader, you may have noticed that those 3 titles are very closely tied to the 3 classical subjects of the trivium, which is the sort of thing that your kids, Samantha, would be doing right now. This is what, ancient homeschooling or ancient schooling generally tended to travel along these 3 tracks before you graduated to mathematics broadly construed, which was also involved like astronomy and science and all sorts of things. But to prepare for the philosophical contemplation of pure numbers and ultimately for doing dialectic, for doing philosophy, you had to first learn the nuts and bolts. And that includes things like rhetorical figures of speech, understanding how language is used, but it includes a bunch of other things too. And the major categories of it, I've said this before, are logic, logike, how do we think? What are the right rules for joining ideas together? Grammar, grammatike, which is not just the rules of sentences, but just the rules of speech generally. How do we speak? How do we properly link sentences together? What is the right construction of language? How do you form a good English sentence? Very important, right? Because if you can purely argue in like symbolic terms for some idea, but you can't speak like a cogent, educated adult, then people won't take you very seriously. And also clear writing, clear thinking is clear thought, right? Clear writing is the same thing as clear thought. So this is also writing skills, right? Grammar. And then rhetoric, which is the art of persuasion, right? Because we also need some way of like dressing up our arguments and eloquently presenting them and all of that. So logike, grammatike, rhetoric, logic, grammar, and rhetoric. This is the trivium, right? This is the tripod upon which all subsequent education stands. And so for Farnsworth, right, classical English rhetoric is rhetoric. Style is closest to grammar, and argument is closest to logic. And his argument book will give you tropes in argumentation, things that work and don't work, fallacies, flawed versions of arguments, correct and valid forms for arguments to take, sound argumentation, and so on and so forth. And then rhetoric and style will give you 2 different approaches to the stuff we talk about in It Figures. And what I love about it is that Farnsworth is one of these guys who's just a magpie. He reads widely in political rhetoric, in classical English essays, in things from the early modern period all the way up to now. And he is like a deep master of the English language and its use in the wild, right? So every time he gives you a trope, he gives you a bunch of different examples and he lists them all, and some of them are just fun to read in and of themselves. But that helps, I think, to gain a concept when these ideas can be a little bit fuzzy around the edges, when they can be different in different contexts. The best way is just to read, and see them in action. So Farnsworth, check it out. Hope that helps, Samantha. As always, you can write into me at rejoiceevermore.substack.com. You can get my book on Amazon or wherever you get your books, Light of the Mind, Light of the World, which I really think you will enjoy. And I will see you next time for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters.